Developing now, new details just released after a deadly mass shooting at an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado. Police finished a news conference moments ago where they identified the suspect, who is now in custody. At least 5 people were killed, another 18 were injured. The shooting happened just before midnight at Club Q in Colorado Springs. They say 2 people inside the club fought to stop the carnage.
Initial evidence and interviews indicate that the suspect entered Club Q and immediately began shooting at people inside as he moved further into the club. While the suspect was inside of the club, at least 2 heroic people inside the club confronted and fought with the suspect and were able to stop the suspect from continuing to kill and harm others. We owe them a great debt of thanks.
CNN's Nadia Romero is following all the latest developments. All right, what more are police saying at this point?
Well, Paula, we learned so much in that press conference, but still so many unanswered questions. So let's start first with the victims. We know that at this point, there are 5 people who were killed, 18 others injured, but that number could change, could fluctuate over the rest of today and over the next couple of days. We know that so many people are still within the ICUs. 3 different hospitals right now are treating some of those patients, have treated some and released them. Others still remain in the ICU with critical injuries. And we know that they were transported by ambulance, by police patrol cars, and some people self-transported. They took themselves to the hospital. So that's why that number has fluctuated in the overnight morning hours and could change throughout the day. Now, family members are still being notified about those who have been impacted, those injured and those killed. That happens first before their names will be released to the public. So we do not know the names of any of the victims at this point. Now let's talk about the suspect. His name was released at this press conference, 22-year-old Anderson Lee Ulrich. That's who police say is the suspect, and witnesses say that he entered that nightclub, Club Q, in Colorado Springs, and immediately opened fire. And that's when we learned, as you just heard, that at least 2 people inside of the club were able to tackle him, disarm him before police arrived to stop the shooting from happening before more people were injured. Now, we're still trying to figure out that suspect's motive. We asked the police, different media people asked the police during that press conference, what was the motive. If you look at the statement that was released by Club Q on their Facebook page, very clearly they believe that they were targeted because this is an LGBTQ community, a nightclub. They were supposed to be celebrating today Transgender Remembrance Day, having a drag show as well. That's not happening, that celebration. Instead, in a process of mourning right now. They also called this a hate attack. So I want you to hear from the district attorney of this area as he explains and answers the question, will this be treated as a hate crime or investigated as a hate crime? Take a listen.
This will be investigated and is being investigated in that lens, but I can tell you that the current bias-motivated crime statute in the state of Colorado provides some elevation, but will not elevate beyond what will likely be charges in this case, which will likely include first-degree murder, extreme indifference murder, those types of charges, which are all Class 1 felony murder charges. So the bias-motivated crime statute doesn't really come into play in this case because it doesn't elevate it beyond what we have as the very top-level charges.
And Paula, this is something that we see in other cases as well, where a hate crime charge is not as high up as a priority or severity of a charge as, let's say, a first-degree murder charge. And you heard the district attorney there say that may not be included in their charges because there are more severe charges at hand. But it does mean something to the community, to the families, when hate crimes are called hate crimes and investigated as such. But again, that's something that we'll have to wait and see how things play out.
All right, Nadia Romero, thank you so much for that great reporting. And now to give us some more insight, former NYPD detective and law enforcement consultant Tom Verney. All right, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. Police say this was a 22-year-old suspect. He used a long rifle. He continued to move through the club during the shooting. What does that tell you?
Good morning, Paula, and my sincere condolences to the family and friends of those killed. And my thoughts are with those that are injured, hoping that they make a full recovery. Look, it's another sad day in America where we have someone who's clearly troubled, who has access to a firearm, and then goes out and commits heinous acts such as this. This is not uncommon from what we've seen in prior mass shootings. This particular shooting brings up those thoughts of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida about 6 years ago. And, we have these individuals, again, with firearms that come in, and for whatever reason, which, at this point, the motive is still clearly unknown, that, they go in to commit all kinds of carnage. Thankfully, and, we had some club goers that had the mindset and the wherewithal to kind of stop and think about, not think about their own personal safety, and to interrupt this horrific act and take action. And thank God for that, because, this could have been a lot worse.
It's incredibly brave. Now, police are crediting those two heroes for fighting the shooter and putting an end to the bloodshed. Is this really what it takes? If you don't want to see this kind of mass carnage, do we now need to rely on civilians to stop this?
You know what? Unfortunately, that's what it comes down to. And in the security world, particularly, this is usually relegated more towards like schools, where we teach the run, hide, fight methodology. So if an active gunman, if there's an active shooter that comes in, you would ideally run away from the shooter. You would attempt to hide from the shooter until authorities arrive. But if confronted directly and there's nowhere else to go, then your next best option is to try to fight the shooter, to disarm or disable them temporarily, to interrupt their ability to continue shooting. And that in upon itself may save more injuries and more lives from being lost.
So based on what we know right now, what questions do you still have? As a law enforcement expert, what questions would you be asking right now to figure out exactly what happened here and why?
Well, the law enforcement authorities there, I'm sure there are local and potentially state authorities, and maybe even the FBI at some point will get involved to, find out who this character is. What is his problem? What is that set him off, and where it made him feel the need to, grab a firearm and walk into a crowded nightclub on a Saturday night and just start indiscriminately shooting people. So they're going to be combing over any social media that he might have. I'm sure they're going to do a thorough background check as to, everyone that knows him, wherever he came from, to find out what his deal is and whether or not he legally had the ability to have access to that firearm or not. And whether he legally obtained that firearm or not doesn't make a difference at this point, because the act itself is just so unbelievably heinous that it just, boggles the mind as to what would make someone, think that was such a good idea to do on a Saturday night.
Of course. Tom Verney, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your analysis.
Sure. Anytime.